So one of the people that I coached is going to talk to you today about her experience and about why she hopefully thinks that financial coaching is an awesome thing that you should consider doing too, and that could really benefit you. So if Grayson is here and would like to reveal herself.
Hey, Dan.
There she is. So I'm going to go ahead and just give the mic over to you, Grayson, and let you take it away.
All right, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides here. Could someone just let me know if you guys can see that all right?
I see it.
All right, great. So as Dan said, I'm going to be talking about my experience in financial coaching, what it was like, what you might expect if you do financial coaching, and some of the takeaways. All right, so before I really get into things, I want to pose a question to everyone, which is, to think about what 5 things bring you the most joy and fulfillment in your life. And if you're comfortable sharing, I'd ask that you post 1 or 2 of those in the chat and share with others, and I'll give people a little bit of time to think about that. If you're not comfortable sharing, maybe just jot these down for yourself, but we'll just take a minute here to think about this. I'll post some of mine in chat as well.
Also, Grayson, let me ask you while people are jotting things down, if we do end up going past 5, is that a hard stop for you?
No.
Okay, great.
All right, I really like the responses so far. As people continue to think about this, I'll just say that, the reason that I asked this question is because it was one of the first questions that Dan asked me when we started coaching. And it was something that kind of surprised me. I thought his first question would be, how much money do you have and where do you have it? But this was actually his first question to me. And that sort of set the tone for the experience that I had in coaching. So just an agenda for today. We'll start by talking about, kind of why I wanted to do coaching and how that started and some of the goals that I had at the beginning. I'll talk about the process, what did we actually do in coaching and what you might expect. And then finish up with, what were the outcomes, and we'll have questions at the end. Feel free to post questions in chat throughout, though, if you want to keep track of and not lose your thought. All right, so just a quick introduction to myself. As I said, my name is Grayson. I am from Maryland. I grew up here. I currently live in Sykesville, Maryland, and I went to school at College Park. I graduated in 2019 and studied computer engineering. And I'm currently doing my master's through the Johns Hopkins program. Some of the more interesting facts, some of the things I like to do for fun. I like to golf. That's one of the things I started doing when the pandemic started, really. I like board games, movies, and I also like to travel, which is something I'll actually discuss a little bit later. And in terms of finances, I won't go into super in depth on my personal finances for the presentation, but just so you get a sense of, where I was before coaching. I was a very risk averse person, as Dan knows. I was kind of that person who kept all my money, in cash or kind of places where I could easily access it. I had some, kind of mid and longer term goals that I'm looking at, things like buying a house and, eventually retirement. And oops. Yeah, and then the last piece is, we didn't focus super heavily on it, but I do have some student loans. Nothing crazy, but just a little bit of debt there. So in terms of, how I got started with coaching, it was actually from one of these meetings where I, heard what financial coaching was really for the first time and thought, hey, that might be something that would be helpful for me. So I think I posted in a chat and said, does anyone know where to find a good financial coach? And then Dan reached out to me, and that's really how things got started. And so, one of the first things we did was kind of establish, what are the goals? What are the things that I'm interested in? And so this is what I came up with. So the first is I really wanted to understand how to invest for retirement. APL has a lot of different, I guess, sometimes seminars, and Vanguard holds like 20-minute meetings you can do with people to kind of try to learn more about this area. But I still felt like I didn't fully grasp it, wasn't confident that I was doing what was best for me. And I wanted to make sure that, I took the time early in my career to set myself up for success. My second goal was really to build confidence with investing. As I said, I was, pretty risk averse. Most of my money, I would say 80 to 90% was in checking and savings accounts, not really, really just losing value. And so I wanted to get more confident with investing. And the last part is I really wanted to plan for some of my more midterm life goals, because I feel like people talk about shorter and longer term goals a lot more than you hear about sort of the midterm goals there. So that was sort of the motivations. So what actually happened during coaching? I will say that it wasn't quite what I expected. I think in my mind, I kind of had this idea that we would meet a couple times. I would walk in with like a thick folder of financial statements and we'd kind of go through it. And that was not at all the case. So, we actually met for quite a long time. So we would meet every other week for about an hour. And that was from the end of August to mid-January, a few weeks off here and there for holidays and things. But, we actually met for a pretty extended period of time, which I really enjoyed because I'm someone who is sometimes a little hesitant to make decisions, and I really like to gather information and ask a lot of questions before I take action. So being able to kind of take my time with things through coaching, I did appreciate that. And in terms of sort of the format of meetings, so generally each meeting sort of centered around a specific topic. And then at the end of that, I would have sort of a homework, a list of action items. And Dan would usually send me, some sort of reading to do on the next topic. And so I would come into the meeting with a lot of questions, kind of report back on the action items, if I got hung up anywhere. And this was pretty neat because I learned a lot of new resources on, just where to find information. The magazines pictured here are a pretty great one if you just want to, pick out an article a month and learn something new about personal finance. And I will also say that, keeping up with current events is actually really important. It's something I noticed throughout this process. And by that, I don't mean that you have to follow the stock market every day, but there were times where, Dan would bring up something like, hey, there's, this legislation coming down the line and this might affect you in these certain ways. And it would actually influence our discussions and some of the actions that we took. So I definitely learned how important it is to kind of keep up with current events there. Another thing that you should expect is that you can share as much or I guess as little as you want. So, you don't have to share any numbers that you don't want to share. It's really up to you. And I think you can actually still get a lot of value out of this without sharing any sort of numbers. Because a lot of what we talked about was, my goals and, different options that I had and maybe my thought process behind certain things and not actually as much like strictly numbers. And that, leads it to my last point, which is there's a lot of things to talk about in financial coaching. And a lot of times even just being able to ask questions was a huge part of this for me. Knowing that I was talking to someone who was knowledgeable, much more knowledgeable than me, was kind of comforting when it came to making decisions. All right, so when it comes to the topics that we covered, this is just a short list of the topics, and it was also tailored to my goals, right? So depending on your goals, you might cover completely different topics. But one of these for me was retirement accounts, as I mentioned. So we talked about, different options through APL, also different options, for individual retirement accounts. And we talked a lot about investing. So we talked about, again, different types of investments, and, even down to researching, where I wanted to invest my money. And then something that I really enjoyed learning about was investment strategies, because I think this is something that, before coaching, I was very hung up on the fact that I'm not an expert, and I felt like I needed to be an expert to get into investing. And really, that's not the case. There's a lot of strategies out there that have been well documented, well proven. They're pretty simple, and a lot of times it's actually pretty hands off. You set it and forget it. And your money grows for you. So the 3-farm portfolio was one example of that, something that I learned about and really appreciated gaining that knowledge. All right. So in terms of, results, I just want to give you an idea of what were the outcomes of coaching for me. And so the first one is, I think this is actually one of the first things I did, was changing my retirement contributions. I was contributing to my retirement, but I started maxing it out. I changed, what type of account my money was going into. And another huge one was that, I mentioned before, the vast majority of my money was in checking and savings accounts. And now about, 90% of my money is actually in investments, and growing, or, will grow over time. So, I opened an IRA, invested in that. Also opened just, a taxable investment account. And in parentheses here, I put actually used it, because that was one of those things that took me a little bit to feel comfortable picking out, the funds I was going to invest in, and getting myself set up there. So I appreciate Dan's patience with that. I also, as a result of this, I feel much more knowledgeable about investment options, even ones that I decided not to use. An example of that was, I-bonds. That's something we talked about. I decided maybe it wasn't right for me at that time, but I'm glad that I know about it, and, it's in my pocket if I want to use it in the future. And then this is kind of maybe saving the best for last here. But I traveled to Jamaica, and this, at first glance might not seem relevant to financial coaching. But in fact it is. And that's because one of the, I think it was actually our first or second meeting, we talked for a long time about travel. Travel was on my list of, top 5 things that brought me joy. But I kind of felt, guilty, I would say, spending money on things like that, because, depending on where you're going, it can get pretty pricey. And so it was something where, I could afford to travel, but I kind of stopped myself because I felt a little bit guilty. I felt like I should be saving, every penny that I could. And so we talked through that. And, Dan helped me realize that, seeing numbers in my bank account is not what made me happy, but actually being able to use that money in ways to support the things that make me happy. It helped me shift my perspective in that way. So I went to Jamaica in February, a few weeks after we finished coaching. This picture at the top here is from the resort I stayed at in Montego Bay. And this picture on the right here was from, we visited the Martha Brae River, and they actually make bamboo rafts out of the bamboo that grows along this river. And they take you down for a couple miles. And it was just really cool. I'd never seen water that looks that turquoise in my whole life. So very glad I did that trip, and very worthwhile. All right, so just some kind of like final, the high level takeaways here. So one of the things that was kind of interesting is, even though this was financial coaching, it was kind of intertwined with life coaching at some points, I felt like. And part of that is because, we talked about how I felt about a lot of financial decisions, why I was hesitant for certain things, or, why I was shying away from certain things. And so there was a lot of just discussion about my goals and how I was feeling in different ways. So in that aspect, I would say, there was kind of life coaching intertwined here. And I did enjoy that. Another aspect is that, I feel like this experience kind of spurred my desire for lifelong learning in the area of finance. And I feel like now I know kind of some more resources to look at when it comes to learning about finance, and also just that I feel like I have my eyes and ears open a bit more, especially, current events, things like that, to just continue staying informed. A big takeaway for me, and kind of going back to those initial goals, was confidence. I feel much more confident now, making financial decisions, confident with, where I'm putting my money, and that I know how to manage it. And, I understand that I don't need to be an expert to be able to manage my money and make it work for me. So that was definitely a big boost there. And then the last thing, I called it risk tolerance. As I mentioned at the beginning, I was pretty risk averse. I wanted all my money sort of, in cash. And I would definitely say that my risk tolerance has changed, because I'm actually, gotten comfortable enough to the point where most of my money is invested. And so that was definitely a shift for me, but one that I'm glad that I made. So just kind of final thought here. I feel like I got a lot out of this experience, as I just talked about. And I think financial coaching would be beneficial for anyone, regardless of your actual financial position, whether you feel like you're experiencing financial hardship and maybe, there's some certain things you really want to tackle, or even if you feel like, oh, I'm in a pretty good place, just having a different perspective on things, having someone to bounce ideas off of and bounce questions off of. I feel like that was incredibly valuable for me. So I'd encourage you to think, again, about this original question, the things that, bring you the most joy in life, and how, maybe financial coaching could help you actually improve those areas of your life. So I just want to end. Special thanks to Dan for taking me on as for financial coaching. It was extremely valuable, and I know he put a lot of time and effort into it. So thank you. And I'll be happy to take any questions.